Avoidant individuals often construct emotional distance as a defense against early wounds, yet beneath this distance lives a powerful longing for closeness and recognition. What appears as indifference is often a carefully engineered strategy of protection. Somewhere in the earlier chapters of life, closeness may have felt uncertain, overwhelming, or unreliable. The psyche, seeking safety, learned to reduce exposure. Instead of expressing need, it cultivated restraint. Instead of reaching outward, it withdrew inward. Over time, this protective movement solidified into identity. The individual began to believe that solitude was strength and that emotional self-containment was maturity. Yet this structure, while protective, does not erase the original human desire to be seen and understood. It merely buries it. Beneath the composed exterior lies a quieter truth, the wish to be known without being judged, to be valued without having to perform, to experience connection without fearing loss of self. This longing does not disappear simply because it is denied. It remains active in subtle ways, shaping attraction, influencing choices, and generating moments of unexpected vulnerability that surprise even the avoidant individual. When such a person encounters someone who embodies warmth and emotional presence, the buried longing begins to stir. There may be admiration from a distance, intellectual conversation that avoids deeper feeling, or a pattern of moving closer and then retreating. This is not contradiction for its own sake. It is the collision between desire and fear. The same heart that seeks recognition also anticipates disappointment. The same mind that values independence quietly wonders what it would feel like to rest in mutual understanding. The distance that once ensured safety now becomes a source of isolation, yet abandoning it feels dangerous. In this tension, the avoidant individual lives divided, protecting against a wound that may no longer be present, while simultaneously yearning for the very intimacy that threatens the defense. Growth begins not with dramatic transformation, but with honest acknowledgement. To admit the longing is to weaken the illusion that distance defines strength. Gradually, the individual may discover that closeness need not erase autonomy, and that recognition from another does not diminish the self, but can illuminate it. In this realization, emotional distance shifts from rigid armor into a flexible boundary, and longing transforms from secret burden into conscious choice. The fear of intimacy is rarely the absence of desire. It is the presence of unresolved anxiety surrounding vulnerability, dependence, and loss. Many who appear detached are not empty of feeling, but overwhelmed by the implications of closeness. To open oneself emotionally is to risk exposure. It is to allow another person access to insecurities, hopes, and fragile expectations that have long been guarded. For the avoidant individual, vulnerability is not a gentle unfolding, but a remembered danger. Perhaps in earlier experiences, emotional openness was met with criticism, inconsistency, or withdrawal. The psyche does not easily forget such impressions. It stores them as warnings. When intimacy approaches, these warnings activate, often unconsciously. The body may tense, the mind may rationalize distance, and subtle excuses may emerge to restore space. Outwardly, it appears as disinterest. Inwardly, it is anxiety. The individual may genuinely admire and even long for connection with a woman who feels emotionally present, yet as closeness deepens, a quiet alarm begins to sound. This alarm is not proof that he does not care. It is evidence that caring feels dangerous. Dependence intensifies this inner conflict. To rely on another person emotionally challenges the image of self-sufficiency that many avoidant individuals cultivate. Independence becomes a shield against the vulnerability of needing someone. Yet need itself is not weakness. It is part of human design. When dependence is equated with humiliation or loss of control, intimacy becomes threatening. The avoidant may fear being overwhelmed, losing autonomy, or being abandoned after investing emotionally. Thus, he distances himself before the imagined loss can occur. The tragedy lies in the fact that the same closeness he fears is what he secretly desires. The anxiety surrounding intimacy convinces him that retreat is wisdom, when in truth, it is protection shaped by the past. Growth requires recognizing that present relationships are not identical to earlier wounds. Vulnerability can be gradual and discerning rather than reckless. When the avoidant individual learns to tolerate the discomfort of emotional exposure without immediately retreating, he begins to differentiate fear from reality. In doing so, he discovers that intimacy does not inevitably lead to loss. Instead, it can offer stability, understanding, and shared strength. The fear does not vanish overnight, but as it becomes conscious, it loses its authority. What once compelled avoidance can gradually transform into cautious but genuine engagement, allowing desire and safety to coexist rather than compete. Many avoidant individuals unconsciously project their hidden longing onto women, idealizing or distancing them to protect their fragile inner world. Projection is a subtle psychological process in which unacknowledged desires are perceived as belonging to the other person rather than to oneself. The avoidant man may encounter a woman whose emotional depth quietly stirs something within him. Instead of recognizing this awakening as his own longing for closeness, he may elevate her into an ideal figure, attributing to her extraordinary qualities that seem almost beyond reach. By placing her on a pedestal, he creates distance while maintaining admiration. The idealization allows him to feel inspired without becoming vulnerable. Alternatively, he may diminish or criticize her once genuine connection becomes possible, convincing himself that she is too demanding or too intense. In both reactions, the essential dynamic remains the same. He is defending against the discomfort of recognizing his own need for intimacy. The projection serves as a protective veil, keeping his fragile desires hidden from conscious awareness. This dynamic often produces confusion in relationships. A woman may sense deep interest from him, followed by sudden withdrawal that appears inconsistent or cold. What she experiences as unpredictability is, within him, an inner struggle. When he idealizes her, he feels safe because admiration does not require surrender. When she moves closer emotionally, he may experience her presence as overwhelming, not because she has changed, but because proximity challenges his defenses. Rather than admitting his anxiety, he unconsciously attributes the tension to her behavior or personality. In this way, his internal conflict is externalized. The psyche prefers to believe that the problem lies outside, because acknowledging it within would require confronting vulnerability. Yet, projection cannot sustain itself indefinitely. Over time, patterns repeat: attraction followed by retreat, admiration followed by criticism. If he begins to observe this cycle honestly, he may recognize that what he seeks in women is not merely an external quality, but a reflection of something unclaimed within himself. The warmth he admires corresponds to his own suppressed tenderness. The strength he respects mirrors his own undeveloped emotional courage. When projection is withdrawn, the woman is no longer an idealized symbol or a perceived threat. She becomes a real person, and he becomes capable of real connection. In this recognition, longing no longer needs disguise. It can be acknowledged directly, allowing intimacy to grow from authenticity rather than from illusion or fear. The tension between autonomy and attachment creates an inner conflict where independence is worshipped while connection is quietly desired. For the avoidant individual, autonomy is more than a preference. It is a psychological safeguard. It represents control, stability, and protection from emotional unpredictability. To stand alone feels safer than to risk leaning on another. Over time, this commitment to independence becomes a core identity. He may take pride in needing little from anyone, in managing his world without assistance, in remaining composed when others become emotionally entangled. Yet beneath this cultivated strength lies a quieter impulse that does not disappear simply because it is ignored. The desire for companionship, shared understanding, and emotional reciprocity continues to live within him. This is not a contradiction of character, but a reflection of human duality. Every psyche contains the wish to be self-sufficient and the wish to belong. When one side is elevated at the expense of the other, imbalance arises. The avoidant man may sincerely believe that attachment threatens his freedom, yet he may also feel an unspoken emptiness that autonomy alone cannot fill. This internal struggle often becomes most visible in close relationships with women. When connection remains light and undemanding, he may feel comfortable and even engaged. But as emotional depth increases, the old fear of losing independence begins to surface. He may interpret intimacy as expectation, shared decision-making as limitation, emotional reliance as confinement. The closer he feels, the stronger the impulse to reclaim space. Yet when he withdraws, he may experience loneliness or regret. He wants connection without the perceived cost of surrendering autonomy. The difficulty lies in the false belief that intimacy and independence cannot coexist. True maturity does not eliminate autonomy. It refines it. It allows a person to remain grounded in self while also participating in shared experience. When the avoidant individual begins to question the rigid equation of attachment with loss of freedom, he opens the possibility of integration. He may discover that healthy intimacy does not consume individuality, but can actually strengthen it. Shared connection can provide support without domination, closeness without erasure of self. In recognizing this, the tension between autonomy and attachment softens. Independence no longer needs to stand in opposition to love. Instead, it becomes one pillar within a balanced inner structure, capable of supporting both solitude and togetherness without fear. The shadow aspect of the avoidant personality contains unmet needs for nurturing, affirmation, and emotional safety. These needs are not absent, they are simply hidden from conscious awareness. The avoidant individual often prides himself on resilience and composure, convincing himself that he requires little reassurance or support. Yet what is disowned does not disappear. It retreats into the shadow, the silent region of the psyche where rejected qualities wait for acknowledgement. Within this shadow lives the part that longs to be comforted during uncertainty, to be encouraged when doubt arises, and to be accepted without condition. Because these desires were once associated with disappointment or shame, they were pushed aside in favor of self-reliance. The persona of strength became dominant, while tenderness was labeled weakness. However, the shadow quietly influences behavior. When he feels unexpectedly drawn to a woman who radiates warmth or emotional steadiness, he may experience an intensity that surprises him. He is not merely attracted to her outward qualities, he is responding to the possibility that his hidden needs might finally be met. This dynamic often generates confusion. He may resist acknowledging how deeply he values affirmation or emotional presence, yet he may feel unsettled when these are absent. If a relationship provides steady reassurance, he might grow anxious, unsure how to receive what he once lacked. If reassurance is inconsistent, his shadow may react with silent disappointment that he struggles to express. Because these needs remain unintegrated, he may expect a partner to intuitively fulfill them while simultaneously denying that he depends on such fulfillment. True integration begins when he turns inward and recognizes that the longing for nurturing does not invalidate his strength. To admit the desire for affirmation is not regression but honesty. Emotional safety is not a luxury. It is a foundation for authentic connection. When the shadow is acknowledged, its energy no longer distorts relationships through projection or withdrawal. Instead, it becomes a source of self-awareness. He can communicate his needs with clarity rather than conceal them behind distance. In doing so, he transforms hidden dependency into conscious interdependence. The shadow, once feared, becomes integrated into the whole personality. Through this integration, intimacy ceases to feel like exposure and begins to feel like participation. What was once buried as vulnerability emerges as a balanced expression of humanity, allowing connection with women to unfold without the constant tension of denial. Shame often silences the longing for intimacy, convincing the individual that needing connection is weakness rather than human truth. For the avoidant man, shame does not always appear as visible embarrassment. It is quieter and more subtle. It whispers that emotional dependence is undignified, that asking for reassurance diminishes strength, that revealing uncertainty invites rejection. Over time, this whisper becomes internal law. He begins to monitor his own feelings, filtering out expressions of need before they can be spoken. Even when he feels drawn toward a woman who evokes warmth and trust, he may hesitate to express genuine affection or vulnerability. The hesitation is not indifference, it is self-protection shaped by shame. He may tell himself that he simply prefers distance, that he is naturally reserved. Yet beneath these rational explanations lies a fear of being exposed as inadequate or overly dependent. Shame distorts natural desire, transforming it into something that feels risky or even humiliating. As a result, he learns to disguise longing as casual interest, to replace confession with humor, or to retreat before deeper feelings can surface. This hidden shame creates an internal split. One part of him yearns for closeness, while another part polices that yearning, warning that it must remain concealed. In relationships, this can lead to mixed signals. He may demonstrate care through actions while withholding verbal acknowledgement of emotional need. He may withdraw after moments of intimacy, not because the connection lacked meaning, but because its intensity awakened shame. To admit that he values closeness would require confronting the belief that such value makes him vulnerable. Healing begins when he questions the origin of this belief. Where did he learn that needing someone diminishes him? Often the answer lies in early experiences where vulnerability was dismissed or criticized. Recognizing this history allows him to separate past judgment from present reality. Intimacy does not erase dignity, it deepens it. The courage to say, "I value this connection," requires far greater strength than silent withdrawal. As shame loses its grip, longing no longer needs disguise. He can approach intimacy not as a confession of weakness, but as an honest expression of his humanity. In this shift, connection becomes less threatening, and the desire for closeness can be acknowledged without fear of losing self-respect. Avoidant individuals often seek intimacy indirectly through fantasy, admiration, or emotional control rather than open vulnerability. Direct expression of longing feels too exposed, too uncertain, so the psyche finds alternative routes. Fantasy becomes a private refuge where connection can be imagined without risk. In imagination, there is no rejection, no overwhelming demand, no fear of losing independence. He can admire a woman from a distance, constructing an inner narrative in which closeness exists safely within his own mind. This inner world feels manageable because it remains under his control. Similarly, admiration from afar allows him to experience the warmth of attraction without stepping into the unpredictability of real engagement. He may follow her life quietly, appreciate her qualities, or engage in conversations that remain thoughtful but emotionally guarded. These indirect forms of intimacy provide a partial satisfaction. They touch the longing without requiring exposure, yet they cannot fully nourish the deeper need to be known and accepted in mutual presence. Emotional control is another subtle substitute for vulnerability. By carefully regulating how much he reveals, by maintaining composure and limiting spontaneous expression, he preserves a sense of authority over the interaction. Control reduces anxiety, but it also limits depth. Genuine intimacy requires moments of uncertainty, instances where one cannot predict how the other will respond. For the avoidant man, surrendering this predictability feels unsafe. Thus, he may prefer structured interactions, intellectual discussions, or roles that allow him to guide the pace of connection. However, beneath this controlled exterior, the original longing persists. He may feel an unspoken dissatisfaction, sensing that something essential remains untouched. Growth begins when he recognizes that indirect closeness cannot replace authentic engagement. Fantasy must eventually give way to reality, admiration must evolve into participation, and control must soften into trust. This transition is gradual and often uncomfortable. It involves tolerating the vulnerability of being seen as he truly is, without rehearsal or disguise. Yet within that vulnerability lies the very intimacy he has quietly desired. When he risks stepping beyond indirect substitutes, he discovers that real connection, though imperfect and sometimes challenging, offers a fulfillment far richer than the safety of distance ever could. True healing begins when the avoidant confronts the inner child within, integrating fear with desire and transforming distance into conscious connection. Beneath the composed adult exterior often lives a younger self who first learned that closeness could be uncertain or overwhelming. This inner child carries early impressions of love, absence, approval, or disappointment. Avoidance was once an intelligent adaptation, a way to preserve emotional stability in circumstances that felt unpredictable. Yet what protected the child may limit the adult. Healing requires the courage to revisit these early emotional patterns, not to assign blame, but to understand their influence. When the avoidant man acknowledges that his impulse to withdraw was shaped by earlier vulnerability, he begins to soften his judgment of himself. He sees that his distance was not proof of coldness, but evidence of self-protection. This realization opens space for compassion toward his own unmet needs. The inner child does not demand dramatic gestures. It seeks reassurance that closeness no longer equals danger. By offering himself patience and emotional honesty, he gradually reduces the automatic impulse to retreat. Integration means allowing fear and desire to exist together, without forcing one to silence the other. The avoidant often believes that he must eliminate fear before pursuing intimacy. In truth, growth occurs when he proceeds gently despite fear, observing it rather than obeying it. As he practices small acts of openness, such as expressing appreciation, admitting uncertainty, or remaining present during emotional conversations, he gathers new experiences that challenge old assumptions. Distance transforms from an unconscious reflex into a conscious choice. He can step back when necessary without abandoning connection entirely. Through this process, intimacy becomes less threatening because it is no longer tied exclusively to past wounds. The relationship with women shifts as well. They are no longer perceived as sources of potential engulfment or rejection, but as partners in mutual discovery. By integrating his inner child's vulnerability with his adult capacity for reflection, he builds a more stable foundation for closeness. Healing is not the disappearance of caution, but the alignment of caution with awareness. In this alignment, the avoidant discovers that connection does not erase autonomy. Instead, it enriches it, allowing him to participate in intimacy with steadiness rather than fear. Emotional withdrawal in avoidant individuals is often misunderstood as a lack of feeling, when in reality it is a method of regulating overwhelming internal states. The avoidant man does not step back because he is untouched. He steps back because he is overstimulated by emotions he has not fully learned to process. When intimacy deepens with a woman, layers of sensation arise within him. There may be warmth, admiration, hope, and also anxiety, doubt, and the memory of earlier disappointments. Without the skill to hold these emotions simultaneously, he instinctively reduces their intensity by creating distance. Silence, delayed responses, increased focus on work, or a sudden need for solitude become tools of self-regulation. From the outside, this behavior appears detached. Internally, however, it is an attempt to restore equilibrium. He tells himself that he simply needs space, and on one level this is true. Yet he may not recognize that the very closeness he retreats from is what activated both his longing and his fear. Emotional regulation through withdrawal provides temporary relief, but it does not resolve the underlying tension between desire and vulnerability. With greater awareness, this pattern can gradually change. The avoidant individual can begin to observe the moment when connection shifts from comfort to overwhelm. Instead of immediately retreating, he can practice pausing and identifying the emotions present. Is it fear of losing control, fear of being disappointed, or uncertainty about how to respond to affection? Naming these feelings reduces their intensity. He may learn that communicating the need for brief space without severing connection preserves both autonomy and intimacy. For example, expressing that he values the relationship while acknowledging his need to process emotions privately transforms withdrawal from rejection into honest boundary setting. Over time, this conscious regulation replaces automatic distancing. The woman involved no longer experiences abrupt absence, and he no longer experiences unresolved longing after retreat. The goal is not to eliminate his need for solitude, but to integrate it into a relational framework that allows closeness to remain intact. When emotional regulation becomes intentional rather than reflexive, intimacy feels less chaotic. He discovers that he can remain present even when emotions intensify, and that connection does not have to be abandoned in order to feel stable. In this gradual shift, withdrawal loses its role as a defensive wall and becomes instead a balanced rhythm within an ongoing relationship. Ultimately, the secret longing of the avoidant individual is not so secret to the psyche. It is written in his restless thoughts. In the moments of quiet envy, he feels toward those who navigate closeness effortlessly, and in fleeting gestures of tenderness that emerge despite careful self-control. He may convince himself that independence is the only path to safety, yet his inner world continues to signal an unmet need for connection. This longing is not merely romantic. It is relational, rooted in the universal human desire to be seen, understood, and accepted without pretense. When a woman embodies qualities that resonate with this hidden desire, empathy, attentiveness, emotional consistency, he experiences both attraction and alarm. The attraction stirs hope, while the alarm reminds him of past vulnerability. In this dynamic, longing and fear coexist, often producing mixed signals that confuse both himself and others. To navigate this tension, awareness is essential. By observing his reactions without judgment, he can begin to discern which impulses reflect genuine connection and which are echoes of old protective strategies. This self-observation gradually allows the avoidant man to approach intimacy with greater authenticity. He may begin to recognize that his fear of emotional closeness does not mean he must abandon it entirely. Rather, it signals areas where his inner resources require reinforcement.